Sonic Universe Issue 63 Reboot. I can't get in the mood to review more of the reboot, but the one thing that's motivating me is that I want to see what Eclipse will do next, and see him finally get what he deserves. We start out with the text box saying that it's a Shattered World Crisis 0 hour. I wish it said first minute instead, because that's bad grammar. Anyways, he's watching on Angel Island as it all starts, all the way back then. And I see the title of the story is called The Great Chaos Caper. If this is gonna involve chaos after all the times he already showed up, it better do something interesting with him. That's why I'm excited, because I have faith for some reason that the writer won't do the same things with chaos that were already done. Or maybe it's a meaningless word here, like how a story arc was called Countdown to Chaos and didn't involve chaos. Then out of complete nowhere, some water comes out of the Master Emerald's solid walls. Maybe in response to the world shattering, but it's not like anything dropped onto the Master Emerald and shattered it. A huge amount of water bursts out of it, and I hope this will be explained as Chaos is protecting the planet from the shattering being lethal. But Chaos would have to be psychic to know what the hell just happened. Because if he hasn't gone insane from the boredom and loneliness of being trapped in the Master Emerald's aura, he must have been sleeping that whole time. And yet the world shattering woke him up and caused him to reveal he could exit the emerald whenever he wanted. So that loud sound far beneath him woke him up, I guess, and not anything else. Well, he is a magical being, so him being psychic wouldn't be out of the question. It shows that there was never any indication at all that he had psychic powers, just water powers. But at least that's a new idea. I wonder if it's just an accidental new idea and the writer never thought about how this could possibly make sense. Knuckles, who's been wondering what was going on, hears an inexplicably pink text bubble saying his name, with us not being shown who's talking, which is inexcusable. And for some reason, he immediately assumes that someone will give him a straight answer about what's going on. And then the person apologizes and says he doesn't know, and he complains about it. At first I assumed this was Tikal because of all my memories with SCC Online, not to mention the one arc where Tikal showed up in the Sonic X comic. But then the pinkness made me worry that it was Jip. But this has to be someone Knuckles already knows, because he's not immediately asking, "Who are you?" Or he doesn't know him and it's just that he's really focused on what's happening. He's told that the world shattering in this way has happened before, but shouldn't now. How did he know that the world has shattered before? And a powerful spirit is meant to help in this scenario, but something might have gone awry. That last word implies it's from someone speaking pretentiously formally, for no apparent reason. Can the comic just tell me who the hell this person is? Why can't it just be shown who's talking? This is needlessly annoying. Knuckles is told by this person he's not questioning that the spirit's presence is weak and might be unable to help. Why is that? If the spirit was always weak when it came out of the planet after Shattered, how is Chip ever able to win in a fight with Dark Gaia and put the planet back together? I guess he's only weak because it happened early, but it's a bit arbitrary that Light Gaia has to wait to regain strength over time, while Dark Gaia is always just as strong regardless of whether he was woken up early or not. Whatever the two Gaias even are. At least with most mythological gods, you know what they're supposed to be the personifications of. I don't know what the two Gaias are the gods of, so why do they exist? Who are their parents? Knuckles says he'll head down to the surface and says, "You two do your world-saving thing." Who's you two? Why is it being needlessly cryptic? Since when does this happen? Knuckles says he'll need someone watching Master Emerald while he's gone. And then we see him at Launch Base Zone, and there's someone near him who strongly resembles Emerald. Same color scheme, looks like a robot. That's distracting. Anyway, someone wants help. And I was also distracted by the word dash being in bold and him saying, "Oh, dash it all." At first I kept reading it out of the corner of my eye as him asking if anyone could dash at all. This writer really wants swears in the comic so badly, but knows the censors wouldn't let him. And yet he was allowed to put scumbag in the comic. Damn isn't even a swear in Europe, and nobody would ever say this. He'd say darn if he was that lame. It's such a lame line that it's immediately jarring, and yet another thing that makes it impossible to be invested in the story and quickly progress through it as a critic. The story seems relatively harmless so far, but it's still made of problems. How the hell did Knuckles even know where to go? Why did he go to Launch Base? I thought that was built by Eggman for launching his Death Egg or something. Why didn't he just immediately go where the spirit told him to? It's also really annoying that these two annoying original characters are immediately being introduced as already knowing Knuckles. It's as if I'm expected to love them right away, when I'm just wondering why the fuck they're a part of Knuckles' life. If the reboot is all about being just like the games. It's confused of the writer to have Knuckles regularly interact with these nobodies instead of being basically alone on Angel Island guarding the Emerald. And that not being the case was initially annoying to me in Archie. This is even worse than Knuckles already being friends with the Chaotix when we first see them in Archie. It's just not natural. A natural way to introduce characters to a comic is to introduce them to the main characters for the first time in the first story they show up in. But because it's the reboot, it's supposed to make sense that he already knows them, when I just want Julie, Sue, and Dimitri back at this point. But it's even worse here because I have no reason to care about these characters. I only like Fix-It a little because he has Emerald's color scheme, and he's apparently an ancient robot helper. But why can't he just have an actual pair of legs? His design is too weird. But as for this archaeologist that's always adventuring, she looks like a bad OC character from DeviantArt. I want to know what species she is. Pika means nothing to me. It sounds like the sound Pikachu makes. And I highly doubt Pikas are blue in real life. Sonic's only allowed to be blue because he's one of the main characters. I want the normal civilians to be normal colors for their animal species. Otherwise, it just comes off as DeviantArt-ish of trying too hard to make them look special. And even putting aside the nitpick that she looks awful, at least I assume it's a she from the eyelashes, all she's saying is that the planet's gone to pieces and she can't contact anyone on the surface through ancient interface. Wait, can't she just use a cell phone? And her dialogue is stilted when she says it's useless, and yet still frustratingly intriguing. She should have just said it was useless, and then reminded us that she still finds it intriguing as an archaeologist. Instead, her dialogue is trying too hard to be funny and endearing at the end, when before, she was just panicking like anyone else would about the world shattering. She seems like a painfully boring character who's failed comedy relief. Also, why on earth would she wear glasses that small? She'd mostly just see the frames blocking her giant eyes. This is the same problem Lara Sue had with her glasses, where they looked like reading glasses. But even worse because these frames are round, and the lenses are much smaller. Also, it better be explained that Relic is just a nickname she adopted based on her archaeologist obsession. Even then, I'm pretty sure that archaeologists work in dig sites with other archaeologists. She wouldn't be allowed to go do the stuff on her own, would she? What makes her so special? And I hope that Fix-It is also a new nickname, because the English language wouldn't have existed thousands of years ago for his name to exist. Also, I guess his ancient programming is too confusing to reprogram. Or else someone would have reprogrammed him to permanently knock it off with the formalities, if Knuckles wanted that so bad. More importantly, Relic is complaining about ancient technology, with a computer screen and desk with buttons behind her, on Angel Island. Sound familiar? Well, yes, Fleetway did this concept too. This is still a Pender's concept. This is Haven. So why are they allowed to use this idea? I'm glad it's back, but I'm confused as hell that they were allowed to keep this. And I don't think it was worth an excuse for Relic to be around all the time. I think Flint's had a poor track record with original characters of his. Lord Hood's a jerk, Bunny's uncle, Andrews, Eclipse, Black Death, Bean. So I'm expecting her to be boring at best. This just makes me feel mocked, because if Reboot Knuckles has Haven around, it just makes the absence of Julie, Sue, and Dimitri hurt, when it wouldn't have been so obvious if he just had the Emerald Shrine, because then it'd be making me think of the games, not of Archie, or Fleetway, and that had Porker in Relic's place. But he was an engineer and programmer, so he made more sense as someone who had a chance of figuring out ancient technology. And we already had an entire comic to grow to care about him because he was one of the freedom fighters. Well, Relic comes out of nowhere as a pointless original character. You don't need to make a new original character, you could just have Knuckles ask one of his friends to guard the Emerald. She says that she was already trying to see if any data logs could shed some light on Fix-It here. But Eggman seems to have overwrote most of the data when they landed, so Fix-It doesn't know what to do with it. And she sucks at computers. First of all, I wish I knew why Eggman overwrote the data. All he did with Launch Base was launch a Death Egg, right? If you're going to add new history because it's the reboot, you You need to explain it right away, not confuse us. I wish it was simply explained that he overwrote the data to spite Knuckles so that he wouldn't know some history of his people. Why is Knuckles alive when the other echidnas and all of his ancestors aren't? How does ancestors survive and keep procreating long enough to have Knuckles if it was just their family? I'm willing to bet that they'll never explain why Knuckles is still around, when Fleetway did. Making the reboot downgrade from Archie would actually made sense. Fixit should know what to do with it because he's from Haven himself. And he's a hopper robot there. Her being bad at computers makes me really wish Porker was here instead, since this is so derivative of Fleetway, and making me wish I was reading that instead. With Fleetway, I'm never there all day with the review, because usually the stories are so well written that I've got no material. I kept complaining that the stories were too basic, and so nearly every review didn't last more than 15 minutes long. But it wasn't because the stories were basic, because the reboot's plots are just as basic. It's because there's so many plot holes that I'm there all day. And her saying ghastly implies that Flynn gave her a British accent to try to make her unique and memorable. But one, an accent is not a substitute for a personality. Bunny and Antoine say hi. And second, he's just using a stereotype because he's making her British just because she's an academic. It's a good choice, but a lazy choice. So that alone won't make me forgive her for being shoved down my throat out of nowhere with Knuckles failing as the audience surrogate. So far I'm completely uninvested in the story because the story hasn't even started yet. She says she's a fool and then wastes a panel saying that she rambled for too long. And Knuckles annoys me by smiling and saying it's understandable because things are a little crazy. And she complains because he made an understatement. I'm fucking sick of this character. So far, her only purpose in life has been to create padding for a painfully slow-paced basic plot. I'm gonna skip to the part where the plot actually starts progressing. I don't need to see Knuckles talking with her about the fact that, oh boy, the world is shattered, as if we didn't already see that. He reluctantly asks for help watching the Master Emerald. Why her, not one of the Chaotix? Oh my god, what a fucking creator's pet. What a Mary Sue. I don't consider her babbling to be an intentional character flaw. I think I was supposed to just see that as endearing. She then tries too hard to be endearing again, being somehow excited to guard an emerald, when obviously that'd be a really boring job of sitting in front of it and staring off into space, or napping. Who would ever want to do that? This story is fucking painful so far. Knuckles says he doesn't have the time to hunt down anyone else. First off, the Chaotix should be on the island if they're his friends, and they are in every single comic. So there's no excuse for writing this self-indulgent crap. I guess Angel Island is so far away from any of his friends that even if he called them on a cell phone, they take forever to get here. And second, he doesn't explain why he thinks he should be in a hurry. This is making the same mistake as the new OC Freedom Fighter team for Tails did in SEC Online, where the writer tries way too hard to make them endearing and wacky characters, and just comes off as favoritizing them and shoving them down my throat, with Tails asking them to join him for no reason after they screwed up. At least she didn't screw up here. But the point is that these characters were written in a fan comic, so this is literally bad fanfiction writing. It's very easy to notice in a franchise known for its fanfiction and fan artist community. She complains with a smile about being his last resort, and the smile is supposed to make me endear to her right away because she's teasing him for no reason at all. And he inexplicably tries to make her feel better, when Sonic, a much better character, isn't someone he goes lightly on. And he teases him too. And Knuckles somehow feels the need to tell her to just watch the emerald and not touch it, as if he doesn't trust her, and she says it won't leave her sight. If this is supposed to be funny foreshadowing to her losing the emerald anyways, or at least having the emerald never be in her sight, I'm gonna hate her even more. Because she made a promise! Shouldn't Flynn have known better than this? He made the reboot to be just like the games out of laziness, and as a cheap way to appease mainstream fans. And then he does this instead of making Knuckles alone on the island with the Chaotix visiting. It's not bad to not be like the games, of course, but if the alternative is an obvious downgrade, he should have just made this like the games. I don't know why he puts up with her. I thought Knuckles was supposed to be an anti-social loner. Oh, finally! We see him gliding over Pumpkin Hill, which is zoned in front of it in order to conform to the classic games for no reason. I like this darker in the sky. The sky looks pretty, and it says that's days later. And Knuckles hates being gone from the island for so long, and hopes that everything's okay. Why didn't he just do something to make sure he'd get to Pumpkin Hill much faster? I hope the Pumpkin Hill setting is taken advantage of in the actual plot, instead of just being there because of video games. Do something that only this setting could do. The story really should have started here. He used to think that finding the spirit tied to the world's health would be easy. Then suddenly some chaos-colored sword showed up behind him. Oh, never mind, it's chaos-colored monsters, one of which is shaped like a bee. Oh, they're really poorly drawn attempts at black guy aliens. Dark guy aliens. Monsters. These have the same personalities as the Black Arms, and we just dealt with those. I have a question. What's their purpose in life? Why are they here? At least the Black Arms made sense because they were aliens, and their goal was to eat. The Dark Guy aliens only exist to have enemies to fight that aren't robots in a video game. Robots make sense because they're made by Eggman to serve him. I never wanted to see these guys again. They're just there to waste time with Knuckles fighting them, but it is an action series, so it's good to have action regardless. But I can't be satisfied with Knuckles cathartically punching them if there is no catharsis because I don't see his fist collide with it. I just see a sound effect and he hits the air. Now he makes contact, but we don't see the alien react to it, let alone get set flying. So I honestly feel like he did nothing to it. For no reason, panels are wasted on him being surrounded by them, and he just stupidly stands there as they all get closer to him. When the Knuckles I know would keep punching and keep turning around if he had to. In fact, when the same thing happened to him in Fleetway, he charged up his fist and spun around, and that worked really well. I really didn't expect to see these monsters in Pumpkin Hill. No, that's not creative, because there's no effort in it. Anyone could put enemies in a place they've never been in before. Hey, let's have a story where Motobugs are in Metropolis Zone. That was easy. There better be a damn good explanation for why the Chaotix showed up to save Knuckles, because it just feels like a Deus Ex Machina that feels cheesy because Charmy talks so triumphantly about it. It's such a coincidence that the spirit that Knuckles is looking for happens to be around here, the same place that the Chaotix are, when this is a pretty big planet. It's actually really unlikely that they'd even be in the same place. Vector then pushes between them and wastes time inexplicably bragging that they had perfect timing, when they technically didn't because Knuckles was already fighting them when they showed up. And then Flynn unnecessarily humiliates a character that was nothing but competent in fights before this point, and was a literal engineering genius in Fleetwood. This is the perfect representation of Ian Flynn's writing. They go bother Vector because he made a forced mistake. He doesn't make sense as a comedy character. And my idea of comedy is not characters being incompetent and stupid when it doesn't make logical sense. I probably hate Cosmo and Fairly OddParents if I came back to it. This is the laziest idea for comedy. And in action series, I'd rather the characters just be competent, or make mistakes in a way that makes sense. The only one of the Chaotix that makes sense to be comedy relief is the kid, Charmy. 2 more times when Knuckles' fist doesn't seem to impact anything. And then Vector punches directly through a not alien and they defeat all the monsters, but that didn't feel satisfying. I wanted to see a lot more of their fists actually impacting them. If the fight's gonna be that short, with no plausible hits against the characters either, it just makes me wish they weren't even in the story. I think I would have preferred it if I just saw Knuckles, for example, pummel one monster. Because then I get to see his previous attack actually affect it because he'd be reacting to it with a pained expression and to get progressively more damaged. We'd see a consequence to the previous panel in the next one. That'd be a good punishment to these monsters for existing, but instead each monster gets hit once and then isn't focused on anymore, and we have to just assume the one hit killed them. Knuckles says it's been a while since they fought alongside each other. Don't tell me Relic is much more with him than Vector. Julie Stu had a better dynamic with them. Sure, she teased him occasionally too, but she was actually like Knuckles, and had a justified purpose. Vector says that fighting is all part of being a good detective. This was just a lame excuse to have him quote a line from a video game as an easy way to appease game fans. And Vector spouting memes related to the things he said in the games is a joke that can easily be overused and just make him a mockery. That's not funny because it doesn't make him a character. And then he wastes a panel saying to Charmy that he said that because he's to serve and protect. And Charmy says that he thought that was the police. I feel like he wouldn't say this. The Chaotix are heroes all the time. At least they were in the good comics. And these Chaotix are detectives purely to conform to the video games. But after Sonic Heroes, that's been a completely ignored part of their characters. It's just something there for them to remind you that it exists. The Chaotix never have stories where they get hired by people to work as detectives and do what real detectives would do. How many times do detectives have to solve murders? The Chaotix wouldn't do that because they have a child with them, but they could solve thefts. And I thought detectives were the police, or at least worked closely with the police. But we'll never see the Chaotix be summoned to the police to help them. If it's not going to be taken advantage of, then them mentioning that they're detectives is literally nothing but waste our time most of the time. It makes me wish this was a different comic. On the bright side, I mean, they didn't need to be detectives for them to be in this plot, as you'll see later. On the bright side, them being mentioned of actual careers is at least an explanation for how they're making money to pay the rent. While other Sonic characters don't tend to get an explanation, like Sonic. Every main character should have how they're paying the rent get explained. But we're never told, even in the passing, that they usually have detective jobs. We never see them get interrupted, or see them tell the heroes that they're busy being detectives. This makes us feel like they never do work to pay the rent anyways. And then there's unfunny jokes about how they're poor and struggling to pay the rent. Are detectives really poor in real life? You'd think the Chaotix would get tons of business because they're associated with the freedom fighters and Knuckles, and thus that'd give them some fame. And they have special powers. So they're automatically the best detectives on the planet, if they're the only ones like that. SBO's ability to turn invisible alone makes him a great spy. So if I'll be expected to believe they're poor like in Worlds Collide, that'll be a forced joke when it was already confusingly mean-spirited. Then Charmy wastes our time some more by inexplicably saying they're police now and asking for a donut in a bratty way. He was never a brat in Archie Sonic. So this is an automatic downgrade, and actually a good writer with actual common sense wouldn't make Charmy a scrappy character just because he was like this in the games. He even said improve on things, not imitate a problem that I complimented Penders on fixing. Never once did Penders make Charmy an irritating waste of time. Charmy being annoying immediately raises the question of, why did the Chaotix keep him around? We need to be shown examples of him being necessary, like saving them with his flight power constantly. He's so small, it's hard to imagine that he'd be able to lift and carry anyone while flying, but he can do it in Sonic Heroes. If he's an orphan, there's no way Child Services would let a child be raised around the Chaotix, who are constantly putting him in dangerous situations, instead of making him live with a real household to have a mother and father. Unless they were told and shown that Charmy is necessary to the team. He wasn't annoying in Archie, so it didn't become confusing that they put up with him when he clearly wasn't their actual friend. SBO thinks Knuckles left the Emerald unguarded, and it turns out the Chaotix haven't met Relic yet, who I almost called Ricky. Ryder? Introduce us to Relic through the Chaotix. They don't know her either. Even then, it'd still be enraging that Knuckles already knows her well. She just makes the reboot feel like a downgrade, when it doesn't have to be that way. She feels like a replacement Scrappy for Julie Sue and stuff. Our time is wasted with another unfunny joke where Vector wonders if Knuckles is dating her. Thank goodness he isn't. And she's already forced on me as it is. Why did she move to Angel Island? Probably to study ancient ruins. But that makes me wonder how in the hell she's the only archaeologist who thought to study Angel Island. There's no indication there are other archaeologists here. She's the only one. Purely so she can stand out that way to the audience when you need a personality to do that. I kinda figured that archaeologists would normally be excited about their job. She just raises the question of why every continuity doesn't have a ton of archaeologists on Angel Island. They were in the Mystic Ruins in SA1. Vector tells Knuckles that the Chaotix were hired by Sally to track down the Chaos Emeralds and save the world. And he's cathartically proud that the heroes hired him for help. I'm glad he said, the Princess Sally, paying lip service to the princess. She feels like an actual princess, and that's cool. I mean, she's done basically nothing to deserve lip service in the reboot so far. But her being a princess is the only thing unique about her that's left. So it better be emphasized. And Sonic's busy trying to rescue his uncle right now. So of course these guys were hired to pick up the slack while he did that. But I don't think it should take that long for him to rescue him, especially since he has Sonic speed, and can run across the surface of the water, across the entire planet even. Actually, that makes me wonder why he bothered with Tails' plane in Sonic Unleashed. It'd be much faster to just run to wherever he wants to go. I guess the problem is, he has to constantly run in a straight line to get to his destination without falling into the ocean. And if the straight line led to a wall and not a coastline that he could run onto, he'd hit the wall of the land and fall. He could go look up on a GPS whether he could run straight ahead and run onto the coast of Spagonia or something. I found another plot hole in Unleashed because of this comic. I like that at least, because I want to find them all. And it also makes sense that Sally hired the Chaotix because they're people they know with special powers. So there's no reason to be surprised that she hired them, Vector. It's almost halfway through the story, and the only thing that's actually happened of value is that Knuckles fought some monsters with the Chaotix. And that only had value because it's an action scene. It didn't need to be there. Knuckles should have logically told him what his mission here was first. And I expected him to say it right after all he said was that he's on a mission. But that'd be natural. Surprisingly, Charmy laughs at Vector because he had begged Sally for a royal handout. Of course he did, she's rich. And they're still negotiating. That wasn't funny. He had every reason to do that, even if it was selfish and greedy at a time like this. But he needs to eat. Out of nowhere, it turns out Knuckles has got more experience with Chaos Emeralds out of any of them when he shouldn't have any experience. The Master Emerald is not a Chaos Emerald. Only Sonic found any emeralds. This is part of why the reboot's poorly handled. Show events in chronological order, you moron. Start out with the Freedom Fighters' first mission. Maybe could have had them start being heroes because they remembered Archie Sonic, and it actually feel like a new beginning, instead of off-puttingly starting out with media res and we'll never see most of their past. So it's taunting you. I'd rather see Knuckles' past experience with the Chaos Emeralds than read this story, and that's a problem. And Charmy sticks his tongue out at Vector, and I fucking hate him. Honestly, I liked him better in Fleetway. At least there, Charmy also talked with a strange verbal tick, and the verbal abuse was so hateful against him that I actually sympathized with him. And he was genuinely a nice guy, and the only nice one of the Chaotix. Imitating the standout problems of another continuity causes the constant imitation to seem toxic. I go to other continuities to get away from those very problems. The franchise is at a point where it's put all its eggs in one basket, and if something goes wrong in that one basket, only a few people are going to be happy with the series as a whole. I took a break from this issue at this point, and came back to it the next day. If this was any other continuity, I wouldn't have cared that it was 8 PM. I would have stayed up and reviewed it all. Predictably, Knuckles agrees to work with the Chaotix. Espio says that Sally had stolen Eggnet data that showed a Chaos Emerald might be in this general area, and Eggman hadn't already gotten to it for no explained reason whatsoever, even though you'd expect one of the 7 emeralds to be a top priority for him. Logically, he would have sent one of his sub-bosses after an emerald the instant he found out where it is. Or something like that. So these guys better run into some resistance trying to get the emerald because of Eggman's side. I'm not calling it the Eggman Empire because that sounds even more stupid. Knuckles says that if the Freedom Fighters say the emeralds are needed to save the world, then the emeralds might have a connection to the spirit he's looking for. He's just assuming this. I would think they're looking for them as a desperate assumption that magical gems can solve any major problem. Even then, why would they think that? They can't make a machine powered by the emeralds that'll put the planet back together. And if the emeralds could simply grant any wish, someone would have taken advantage of that to change the status quo by now. Knuckles somehow thinks it makes sense for an already powerful spirit to be drawn to the emerald's power, even though it obviously wouldn't need it. It makes sense for a person without magic to be drawn to it. Of course, nobody lampshades this because that'd be self-aware of the writing. So Knuckles uses his emerald sense, and says that seems to be moving as well, and apparently Knuckles always knows which way is north and so on. Like he's a pigeon, because it immediately says it's heading south. It made sense for Dulcie because she's a magical dragon. The story could at least explain that Knuckles trained himself to know which way is north all the time because of an anklet that vibrated every time he faced north, thanks to Rotor. But that makes sense, so I can only assume it's magic. It would have made sense if Knuckles had kept it simple and just pointed in a direction and said, "It's that way." Oh good, Espio says the logic prevailed because Eggman is trying to get the emeralds. But because his own forces are busy dealing with the Shattered World crisis, he's hired a band of mercenaries to find the emeralds for him. First off, why the fuck haven't we been told exactly what Eggman's forces are doing to deal with the Shattered World crisis, even at this point? They're evil armies. What are they supposed to do? Glare at the planet and hope it goes back to normal? I mean, anything action related, militaries could help with too, not just them. We haven't seen any of Eggman's forces doing the same things to rescue people from a flood or whatever that the heroes did. I don't even know how one city got flooded. Wouldn't it have made sense if the only problem was that there was an earthquake and a lot of people had to deal with the consequences of it? It would be nice black and gray morality if we saw that even Eggman's forces were rescuing people. I mean, he's ruling the world, he kinda has to. Also, I just have to assume that Eggman has a good reason to have faith that the mercenaries would actually give the emeralds to him. Either no one wants to risk Eggman going after them for the emerald after being sold it, or the mercenaries have bombs in them that would blow up if they disobeyed Eggman, and he can make that happen right away. That would make sense. If it weren't for that, we could at least be told that Eggman knows where his workers live, and would destroy their houses and lives if they disobeyed him. So he doesn't even need bombs as an incentive. I wouldn't have to go through this train of thought distracting me for a while if they just kept it simple and had Eggman send robots to find the emeralds instead. He's always relied on robots. And the good thing about that is that it keeps it simple. You instantly understand why they're working for him and he trusts them, because they're programmed to. I see no reason for why he'd send free-willed mercenaries to find the emeralds for him instead of robots. Oh god, it's not Bean and Bark, is it? Please no. I assume it's just new characters and not that obnoxious bird again. But even then, since when does Flynn make likable new characters? It turns out that the reason the Chaotix is able to glide is because Espio and Vector are holding onto special rings. And Charmy's also holding one, and there's some yellow stars between them and Charmy's ring. Would it kill the artist to just have the stars be a yellow chain? Or a whole bunch of rings? I guess it has to be stars that clearly don't look connected enough to each other so that we can understand that it's all magic supporting their weight. I'll actually compliment this convolution because it makes much more sense that a magical ring would support their weight than Charmy simply carrying their weight as they're holding his feet as he's flying, like in Heroes. This is an exaggerated Knuckles Chaotix reference, and that game is more obscure, so it deserves to be referenced more. It's taking advantage of that game's story potential. Plus, how could you fit it all in one small panel if it was like Sonic Heroes instead? If Vector was below Espio on this panel, we wouldn't be able to see all of them. Still, I wish I knew where they got these convenient rings. We weren't told that Knuckles Chaotix because it was just a 90s game. This is a comic book, where all of the focus is on the story. Or at least it should be. But because the plots are so basic now, it's all in dialogue padding things out 90% of the time. But even dialogue is still part of the story. Knuckles' dialogue is a redundant waste of time. And Charmy complains that he's creeped out by the pumpkin-faced train, and Knuckles hopes the ghost will just ignore them. I want to know why there are ghosts here. I'm guessing we won't be told that because Flynn's nothing but disappointments. The benefit to reading a comic in the first place is that all the focus is on story. Of course the game couldn't develop the history and world of every zone because you were only in the zone to play it. Here, we need to know why there are ghosts here, or it'll just feel like a canon immigrant region of the world that was plopped into the comic out of Sonic Adventure 2, rather than actually feeling like a part of the overall world. I don't even know where this place is in relation to everywhere else in the world, which is the case in Fleetway as well. It makes the world building a bit weaker when you aren't forming a world map. At least in Archie, you knew that Sonic was on his way to the South Pole when he was following Ixis, so every place he encountered on the way was progressively more to the south of his home, and when he was on his way home, you knew he was going north. So of course he went through a jungle in South America, and you had to assume that the Dragon Kingdom was in the far east. Where's Pumpkin Hill? I have the feeling that Pumpkin Hill was used in STC Online, and the ghosts were taken advantage of in the story as more than just an enemy in a game level because Rouge was threatening Porker with them to get something out of him. And we were told that the ghosts were the spirits of Echidna warriors who fought with the Dracon alien invaders. So there, that wasn't very hard. They're ghosts of soldiers. As for why there's a ghost train when trains don't have souls, that's one of the strange rules of the world that I just have to accept because ghosts are already fantasy anyways. It's already impossibly confusing that ghosts are even allowed to stay on the planet instead of all having to go to the ghost realm. What makes these ones so special? Don't give me unfinished business, because how could they have unfinished business here? There's nothing to do for them on Pumpkin Hill. It's not like it's a place full of houses that they could have been living in, like a city. In SCC, the ghosts were there because Pumpkin Hill was the backdrop of an ancient war. Anyways, Knuckles must be pretty desperate if he's saying that ghosts might ignore them. How can you be that genre-blind? Charmy wastes time being even more genre-blind by not believing in ghosts in a world full of magic. And Knuckles tries to expect me to believe that the ghosts here are worse than the ones in Sandopoulos Stone's ruins. Well, they are worse because they don't make any sense to be here. Charmy screams because he sees ghosts, when I'm not sure ghosts should be scary to people used to a world full of robotic killing machines. But he is a kid. But that doesn't justify him dropping the chaotics. Fortunately, Knuckles grabs the ring just in time without more than a panel being wasted on the pathetically failed joke. Vector reveals that the sling rings are technology. Fuck it, I refuse to buy that. Wasn't the whole point of all the stars there to tell us that it's just magic and we shouldn't think about it? If it's technology, then it makes more sense if it just looked like the Inner Beam. Espio complains that they shouldn't trust their combined weight to a 10-kilogram bee either, but also reference the fact that they have hung from his feet before. This is so stupid. The comic was doing perfectly fine giving me the assumption that they never hung from his feet before. It was making more sense than that. Then I'm told that they have done that successfully, somehow. I just looked it up, and 10 kilograms are 22 pounds. Is it realistic for a 6-year-old like Charmy to weigh only 22 pounds? I looked it up the next day, and to be 22 pounds, a kid would have to be a literal baby at 12 months old. Vector lampshades that feet are more substantial than Sparkles. Hello? Where did they get this technology? Saying that it's technology means that someone has to have made it. When I was assuming it was just magic, I assumed it just popped up for no reason at some point, like every ring. So now I know that it has a backstory, so I want to know what that is. But I guess I'll never be told that because everyone in the story already knows what that backstory is. Knuckles and the heroes start climbing, and Vector has a Fleetway Vector moment by asking what's stopping them from leaving Charmy behind. And Espio guilts him, which reminds us that he's supposed to be a good guy at the end of the day. A moment that's still way too rare compared to his incompetent moments, but at least has something Fleetway doesn't. But still, there's absolutely no excuse whatsoever for Charmy to be separated from the team now. I naturally assumed that he would stay with them after he freaked out about ghosts because he needs them around to protect him, and he had no reason to head off in any direction. Not to mention there's no way in hell he wouldn't have noticed that he dropped the chaotics when he was used to feeling the sling ring in his hand. Vector blames Knuckles for this, somehow assumes Knuckles was joking about ghosts, and the bad writing is lampshaded a little because Knuckles asks why he thinks he's making them up. Lampshading the bad writing doesn't make it go away, especially since Knuckles points out that Vector's seen ghosts too. And the text box says that he's referring to Sonic Heroes, because apparently that game's canon to the reboot too because game bias. Again, it never occurred to me that a game from an unrelated continuity was canon to this one, especially since this is the beginning of a reboot. I feel like I'm experiencing their first adventure. He should know that the audience is feeling like that too. Vector has no reason to think he's making up ghosts if he's seen them before. So Heroes didn't need to be canon to the reboot. A game reference made things make even less sense. Then a panel is wasted again on Vector and Espio looking at each other in concern, because that adds to the story. Well, at least I got to see that Espio was walking up the wall because he did that in Knuckles Chaotix too. So he has sticky shoe soles here as well. Our time is wasted some more as they get up the cliff and Knuckles asks how a ninja is afraid of ghosts, because apparently he saw them look at each other in concern. And Espio says he thinks Knuckles is afraid instead and is just projecting. Then we see that for no reason at all, Charmy was hiding in a jack-o'-lantern and whimpering for no reason at all, instead of staying with them. Why are jack-o'-lanterns here in an uninhabited, tall mountain range? Who put them here? Why? These kinds of questions are why I can't get invested and take this shit seriously in the slightest. Which means I can't respect it. A real comic book would immediately start by explaining this place's background. Good thing Vector calls him out on dropping his friends into an abyss, though bottomless has to be bullshit unless it's literally leading to the shattered planet's core. But the story expects us to feel sorry for Charmy instead. Knuckles lampshades Charmy being afraid of ghosts as well, and Charmy gives a simple-minded response, and Knuckles pisses me off even more with the not nearly self-aware enough self-aware writing. He says that Charmy trashed a bunch of monsters 10 minutes ago. I like that we were told how long ago it was, but still, if the writer knew this didn't make sense, there's no excuse whatsoever for writing it anyways. Did he think we were all sadists who would laugh at Charmy's misery, and so it was worth it to write a joke? This isn't remotely funny. So why put it here? This is just wasting my time, making the presence of the chaotics agonizing. I honestly don't think Knuckles needs their help anymore. He should have just ditched them. Then there's a cheesy moment because Knuckles encourages Charmy successfully, and Charmy says he's awesome. The heroes' lives are so effortlessly easy, and this writing overall is so bad that I'm still distracted by it. So I can't care when the story expects me to. That's what cheesy means. Because while having sincere-looking, heartwarming moments is normally good, like Charmy apologizes to Vector for dropping him and hugs his face, I'm still too mad at the story's tedium and agonizing padding to care. I just feel like this comes out of nowhere. Charmy has done nothing but mock him like a bully so far. Now all of a sudden he's nice to him? SBO tells Knuckles that he's got away with the kids. Knuckles proudly says that he just stated the facts. And I immediately think about the fact that Archie Sonic clearly showed he had a daughter in the future. And how could they ever have gotten to that point? How did they get to the future after the point where Eggman recreated reality so that Julie Sue wasn't with Knuckles? And Silver interacted with the people in Archie's future, so it's canon. And he's from a future too, that couldn't have been progressed to, unless the reboot was predestined to have been undone eventually, or never happened. Vector Lampshades, no more distractions. Well, I can't help it if the writing's so sloppy, and there's padding panels everywhere. Speaking of which, why does he waste a panel asking Knuckles if he can still sense the emerald? Of course he can. This is exactly why Sonic can't get away with having a plot this basic, and having this much comic space. There's nothing more agonizingly boring than a really slow pacing full of padding to get away with the basic story. Why don't they just combine all of the stories of this entire arc into one issue, and get rid of the padding? Then it would be a much more interesting story. If I didn't have the mission of finding every problem, I'd never read this bore fest. Almost nothing they're saying is even relating to the place they're at. I don't see why the ghosts have to be here in particular. So at that point, ghosts could be anywhere. So they could be anywhere, like Sandopolis. Get on with it. Knuckles says that the emerald's going further down as the panel is drawn all green with echolocation like waves. The green part is just there for the artist to rush the art. I thought Knuckles was always aware of his radar. If he had to access it himself every time he wanted to use it, and then it turned off, treasure hunting would be unbearable. He'd never be able to constantly track an emerald successfully because he'd go too far in one direction without noticing it and pass it. So apparently he just did this to show off, and wasted our time. How does Knuckles know that what's at the bottom of this canyon is a whole mining network? And it was abandoned. And he says it was probably abandoned because of the ghosts. You were almost there! We could have been told that the mine collapsed, and that's why there's ghosts. Why would ghosts inexplicably show up for no reason just to scare the miners away? Also, that mine must have been abandoned a long time ago. Long before people could just make robots to automatically mine for them. This is a futuristic world with robots everywhere. Why wouldn't there be miner robots? Knuckles had no reason to know anything about this place because it's not on Angel Island. I'm sure he visited it before in SE2. Again, it's an alternate continuity reboot, so it just feels weird to think of SE2 as being canon to it. But all he did was visit it to find 3 shards, not study its history. It'd make more sense for SBO to know this, not someone sheltered and isolated. If he's not going to be like the game's Knuckles anyways, it just makes it all the more distracting when he has to interact with Relic, and say he's more experienced with the world than he should be, because it makes me go into an Archie Sonic mindset instead, and immediately miss that. I could not miss that if this was better. No, that's a surprise. When Knuckles trailed off about to mention ghosts, I thought he was going to get interrupted by a ghost, like what happened in a sci-fi fantasy series. But instead he trails off and says circumstances, because he was humor and charming, who's all of a sudden the team coward. I hope it's just because he's afraid of ghosts and we're not going to have another Cream the Rabbit situation, because making awesome characters incompetent isn't funny, it's incompetent. But yeah, it was immediately obvious that he was going to blame the ghosts because they already talked about them. And yet Vector and SBO just look at him funny instead of having expressions or thoughts that tell us that no, they aren't dumb as bricks. Vector asks why Eggman's cronies are going deeper underground if they have the emerald, asking a stupid question when it should be obvious that they want to hide themselves from potential heroes better. And maybe they have an underground transport tunnel, like a subway. And Charmy just makes a pun, like it's early Archie. But early Archie's a million times better, so that just made me sad. Fleetway also had puns. At least Archie was always interesting, so it's worth the plot holes because I have tons of new ideas to look forward to. And the pacing wasn't agonizingly slow and tedious, as demonstrated here because another panel's wasted on Vector reacting to his pun. I didn't expect him to react at all, probably because I have much better writing sense than Flynn, as usual. So I assumed he'd speed things up and get to the damn plot already. And Charmy has no reason to outright laugh. I thought he was embarrassed at making the pun because of his nervous smile. Suddenly, Charmy gets startled by 3 explosions making boom sounds that hit the cliff they're on. Gee, it sure is convenient that all 3 of those explosions missed them when they didn't expect them, and they have barely any space to stand on. So already I know that the entire arc after this is forced. It was already feeling forced to happen as it was because I didn't know who the hell that pink text box person was who conveniently told Knuckles to look for Light Gaia, who she had no reason to know about. By the way, I'm still feeling like he's here to look for Master Emerald pieces. I actually forgot that he was looking for a spirit. This is because 1, him being back in Pumpkin Hill is derivative of SE2, and 2, he's using Chaos Energy Sense like an SE2 to look for an emerald. Plus, I remember something that's coming after this, so it doesn't actually matter that he came here for an original reason. I don't even know how he knew to come here in the first place. Was he able to track down Light Gaia with his Chaos Emerald Sense? How did Pink Text Bubble Guy know where he had to go? But yeah, 2 panels are wasted on fake tension, and then I'm conflicted and pissed at seeing Bean show up again, as well as Bark and Fang. I thought there would be new characters for a new idea. On the one hand, it's lazy and uncreative to use these guys again, and I already had enough of Bean. But on the other hand, I have no faith at all that any new characters by Flynn wouldn't be one-dimensional bad guys by this point, or boring, or obnoxious. He'd fuck up them too, they'd have bad designs. At least these guys look good. But their personalities are just as bad as any potential OCs. Anyways, this story was by Ian Flynn, and I already mentioned how forced the whole thing feels. Who the fuck is this pink text box person? If it was Tikal, we should have seen her. And there was never any indication that the Ancient Echidnas would know about Light Gaia. Knuckles had no reason to actually go on this adventure instead of guarding the Master Emerald. He's already on a floating island. He has no reason to care about the world being shattered if he's such a dedicated guardian. The entire story was a basic plot where Knuckles and the Chaotix wander around Pumpkin Hill looking for a Chaos Emerald for Sally. Instead of painfully annoying jokes, and Charmy briefly taking off for no reason, that padding should have been replaced with an explanation for why there are ghosts in Pumpkin Hill, if not a ghost train. The closest we got to world building is Knuckles somehow knowing there's an abandoned mine, when Vector just said there was a bottomless abyss below them. Instead of it fleshing the place out like a real comic book, it literally just feels like it was taken out of SA2 and plopped into the comics world because the writer was too lazy to come up with a new setting. And Relic didn't need to exist. At least if she turns out to indeed be nothing but obnoxious, I won't have to feel bad about bad-mouthing her anymore. Because right now, she has no reason to already know Knuckles, and it's just immediately shoved down my throat. All she did was contribute to more padding. Obviously the story should have started with Knuckles gliding over Pumpkin Hill. The whole story's problem was that it had agonizingly slow pacing with padding everywhere to try to get away with an overly basic story. I think the worst the story can be to me is boring, because at that point even I'm bored just talking about it. So it's not fun for me to talk about this. There isn't even any catharsis in it. The story could have worked if they replaced the intrusive jokes with the characters doing a lot more things as they progressed. Then I'd have a lot to describe instead of just, they fly over an abyss and then Fang tries to shoot at their cliff, and somehow misses when he actually just killed him. And so the entire arc had no reason to happen. Fang's supposed to be a good shot, and he doesn't even complain about missing so much, which is even more unrealistic. I assumed some missiles were being shot at them from mercenaries on trucks. Bullets don't make literal explosions. Barely anything was done in this plot. Maybe there should have been more to Pumpkin Hill than an abyss. I actually forgot that Knuckles got into a fight with Dark Arms monsters. I mean, Dark Gaia aliens. I'm honestly not doing this on purpose. That's just what I'm thinking when I try to mention them. The only motivation I had whatsoever for reviewing the story earlier than I absolutely had to was that I thought I'd see Eclipse doing something again. Nope, set as one-dimensional bad guy, mute one-dimensional bad guy, and one-dimensional bad guy is just insane. Wow, I'm sure they'll have tons of interesting things to say that aren't just taunting the heroes and boasting. I'm sure their dialogue won't all be padding like it always is. Silent robots would be better at that point, because at least they're faster. Fuck this. Once again, I came into a story in the reboot with only one expectation, and still got let down. Like, this plot is so basic, but if all I did for the whole review was just mention what was happening in the story, and progressing the... it would just be so boring.